Hello and welcome to another week's Monday Night Football on a cold and wintry evening in Trent. But as always, we've braved it to bring you the discussion from the weekend's football. All of the fallout from what was a pretty eventful weekend.
I thought it was quite boring.
At Tynecastle especially. As you could have probably guessed, most of our focus tonight will fall on Tynecastle. There will be very little Hibs content tonight, little bits and pieces thrown in, but it will balance out because next week will be almost entirely dedicated to Hibs, given that they are in action in the Scottish Cup and Hearts aren't in action at all. They have a free weekend next weekend, so any Hibbies, stay tuned with us because we promise it'll even out next weekend and you'll get to hear us wax lyrical, and then you can throw it all back in our faces later about how smug we are and all that kind of stuff. We know you love to do that. Right, okay, boys, opening question for today. There was somewhat of an incident in Gorgie over the last week, and it had nothing to do with football. It had everything to do with a wee stray McMuffin in McDonald's. So what I want to know, based on the alleged Jason Cummings incident, is if you could chuck a McMuffin at any figure in Scottish football, who would that figure be and why? Scott, do you want to go first?
I think, given his comments about Derek Reardon on Saturday, I think it would have to be Tam Cowan. I'm pretty sure he regarded him as a class act. Not quite sure that's what I'd describe Derek Reardon as, and I do normally like what Tam Cowan has to say, generally speaking, but yeah, I think he definitely deserves a few things to be thrown at him for that comment.
It's a bit harsh because Tam's done quite a good job at keeping the weight off, I think, and you're just kind of you're risking a bit of relapse there, chucking McMuffins his way, like.
Especially considering he's a food journalist?
I believe he is.
Is he still doing the meal stuff, is he?
For a while at least.
To my knowledge, he gave a nice review for the Handmade Burger Company last time I was there. Mine follows on from Scott's. Probably just for everything he'd done over the years, Derek Reardon.
Right, okay.
There's anyone deserves it. It's probably him. There's probably quite a few from over the years, I could say. The other one, not in Scottish football, who I would love to throw it in his face just purely so I didn't have to look at his stupid face any longer. Rio Ferdinand. God
never think
damn,
of that.
I hate that guy. Just no for me.
Just so you wouldn't have to look at his face any longer.
He always,
it would just
he always looks like he's
rebound.
chewing a wasp. He's never happy, apart from when you've been murked. Okay. That's slightly topical, but
okay, well, we had a few from our Twitter followers as well. So Andy Morris at Andy M1874 said Willie Collum, possibly the worst Grade 1 referee this country's ever had.
He's obviously never seen Brian McGinley. Definitely one of the worst Grade 1 referees ever.
Okay, Rab Bright at Robert Bright 27 went with the rather topical but somewhat obvious Neil Doncaster. Has no empathy with average Scottish football fan, paid a fortune but not delivering basics of job, hides behind corporate speak, thus deserving of a McMuffin in the pus. Sean?
can I also throw in here just now Willow Flood, because he looks like he needs a good feeding.
Okay.
No one looks iller in Scottish football than Willow Flood, so everyone threw a McMuffin at him.
Amy at Blue-Eyed Double D Greyer simply says the thumb, which I think we all know who that is.
All I heard there was Double D.
Fair enough. And Craig Leach, who's not joining us tonight. He was due to, but he's dinged us at the last minute because he just couldn't deal with the smugness in the studio tonight.
I think he realised how bad the buses were probably going to be the night of that weather.
That's maybe true, aye. So he said clearly it would be Chris Boyd. He'd be ecstatic at the on-field delivery service. For myself, I think I would have to go on a similar note to the Willow Flood one. I would have to go with Colin Nish after the weekend's game. He has a wee bit of obviously a Hibs connection, but I think ultimately this big dominant target man, and he just looks like he needs a good feed. Especially in direct competition with General Zayfauk, it just was that thing of like no one is going to be intimidated by Colin Nish. He got brushed off a couple of times, and the whole big tall frontman act used to work, and it just doesn't really anymore.
Having been up close to him at certain points at the weekend as well, he's the weirdest shape. ever. He's got big gangly arms, but he's got a wee bit of a belly on him and stuff.
But that's what I mean. I think he needs a good feeding. So I mean, Zayfik's showing that in theory you can be a little bit overweight at least and still function in that role. At the moment, he's just this weird in between thing. It doesn't really work. I think a few extra McMuffins and we might see him be a wee bit more of a dominant figure up there.
It's like if you had all different parts of a toy, like someone had ripped all the arms off about 5 and you just stuck on whatever. It's just weird.
Okay, so we will get on to many different weird things about Cowdenbeath very, very shortly. What I'm going to do just now, I'm going to go a quick couple of adverts and then we will come back, because this middle section of the show is going to be rather lengthy. We're going to quickly touch on the Hibs result, spend a couple of minutes on that, and then there will be a good 20-25 minutes chat here about Hearts Cowdenbeath. We're going to go through the goals, we're going to look at Cowdenbeath's performance as well, and we're going to say how much of the end result, the 10-0 result, was down to Hearts and how much of it was down to Cowdenbeath. We will do our best to take the maroon tinted spectacles off and look at it fairly, and hopefully we'll come up with a picture where in the end we can kind of fairly say what really led to one of the most momentous games, especially scorelines, that I can certainly ever recall witnessing either of the Edinburgh clubs involved in. So we'll go a couple of ads right now and we will be back very shortly. Stay tuned on Radio Saltire to Monday Night Football. And we're back on Monday Night Football. My name is Sam Meakin. Joining me in the studio are Sean Meakin and Scott McIntosh. We are about to dissect Hearts versus Cowdenbeath, but first let's touch on Hibs versus Alloa. A 1-0 win, a bit of a scrappy game, but generally that is to be expected at the Indodil Stadium. Scott, how impressed were you at Hibs showing the ability to tough it out?
Yeah, I think I'll claim to be impressed, because obviously Hibs won't have impressed themselves. There is obviously this myth about Hibs needing to play the Flair way to obviously win games, and I think they shown on Saturday a different side to themselves, similar to their Scottish Cup win earlier on in the year, and I think it was a very valuable 3 points. At the end of the day, that's all that counts at this end of the season, especially considering where Hibs are, and it kept the pressure up on Rangers after drawing on Friday.
I would agree with that. I think the best thing it shows for Hibs as well is their big players are turning up when they need them. Scott Allen not only scored the free kick, but he hit the bar. Seemed like he was the driving force behind them getting the result. So that's all they can look for. As you say, it's a tough fixture going there. It's not the best pitch ever. So coming away with the 3 points is all they need at this point in the season. It's just making sure they're as comfortable as possible going into the playoffs, and that was the outcome there. So
on the point of Scott Allen, before we move on from this game, I've been quite interested in Alan Stubbs' management of Scott Allen. It seems to be generally accepted that Allen is quite a difficult character to manage, possibly. For instance, Lewis Stevenson, when he was coming up for that kind of testimonial, and they were talking about how long he had been there, and they mentioned he's a model professional, and Stubbs at that point said, in complete contrast to someone like Scott Allen, who moans left, right and centre no matter what you're doing, he's not happy about it, whereas Stevenson gets his head down and gets on with it. Equally, at the weekend there, they were talking about some players playing Monox and David Gray desperate to play and stuff, and they were talking about the fact that Scott Allen, I think this was last weekend actually, had a chest infection, and that he had been in the medical room saying, oh, this is the worst chest infection anyone's ever had. And then this weekend, Alan Stubbs kind of took him to task a wee bit over his lack of goals. Certainly in a game where he had scored the winner, you wouldn't necessarily expect for him to be criticised, but he was. How interested are you in that style of man management for a player who, as I say, seems a wee bit difficult?
I think that's just a side to Stubbs' man management skills. I think he's trying to say, well, you done well on Saturday, but I'm wanting more of that. No point in resting on your laurels, because let's be honest, Scott Allen's probably someone that you can accuse that of early in his career. He got the big money move, personal reasons, I think, due to his attitude. A lot of things didn't seem to go well for him down south. So I think Stubbs is obviously managing to handle him. You can see that he is putting in, it's not so much the performances, but he's coming up with the moments for Hibs. That's what you'll look back on Scott Allen's first season at Hibs. It's all about moments rather than performances, maybe apart from that 4-0 against Rangers where he seemed to turn it on for the full 90. So yeah, I think he's doing a good job, Stubbs, with handling him.
Okay. The reason I brought up, it's just interesting to see a manager who seems quite willing to volunteer things into the public domain. Like he wasn't questioned about those aspects of Scott Allen. He just kind of volunteered them, and it is like, if he acknowledges them, then it's actually quite a insight into the Hibs dressing room, which certainly Robbie Nielsen, for example, is not volunteering.
I think
anything.
If you're winning, you can slip stuff like that in there. Obviously, if you just got beat 2-0, you're not going to start criticising someone's professionalism or maybe the fact that they'll whinge a little bit more. But he is a maverick player, and sometimes I think the rest of the team will accept that, as long as he'll come up trumps with them in the big games.
It's interesting because it gives Hibs fans a little glimpse into Scott Allen's actual character, though, Sean, doesn't it, that you wouldn't otherwise get?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, going back to his time down south, you never know. Stubbs could have his finger on the pulse with what has possibly went on down there. Maybe he was slightly too pampered, and maybe he needs that, something to ruffle the feathers a bit every once in a while to make sure he's not coasting too much. So it is bizarre I'm putting that out there, but if it's working and they're getting performances from him, then keep it up.
Yeah, good point. Right, let's move on to the real epic affair that took place at Tynecastle. Now, we've left this a wee bit freeform. We've not spoken too much about how we're going to go through this. So, would you like to talk about things separately? Would you like to talk about the positives from Hearts' perspective and then the negatives from Cowdenbeath, or do we want to talk about them all as we go through each goal, or...?
Let's just get the negatives out the road.
Okay, well, we'll do that first then. Before we go into that, though, I do want to ask, just for a moment, take the result and the amount of goals out of it completely. Okay? Just for one moment, and then we'll get on to going through them in their glorious detail.
What's left?
Well, that's my question. Scott, for you, the scoreline obviously presents a certain image of the game. For you, was that the best Hearts have played this season?
No. I still think the first half against Falkirk earlier on in the season at Tynecastle is as good a performance as we've put in.
Purely as a performance, where would this sit in your chart? Is it top 3? Is it top 5? Top 10?
It'd be top 10. I'm not quite sure it'd be top 5. I think we've had really good performance against Falkirk. I actually thought our performance against Queens last week was a really good performance. I would have had that in the top 5, along with the home match against Livingston, the 5-0 game, and also 4-0 away to Rafe, and probably the 2-1 game at Ibrox. So it wouldn't make my top 5.
Sean, do you agree with Scott?
I can see where he's coming from, but no, I wouldn't agree. Purely from the standpoint of, I was not worried, because how can you be worried being 5-0 up at half time? But I was concerned that it was just going to be a case of seeing the game out. At that point, just playing possession football, just making sure everyone's getting time on the ball, getting people who maybe need some playing time on the pitch, and just kind of, we all knew who was going to go away with the 3 points there, so might as well just, just ease into the game. The fact that we still went for it, and still, didn't get me wrong, we could have went for it even more and probably got more goals, but the fact that they recognised that there was people coming to see that game who wanted to go away with a lasting memory of a 10-0, and also just the hunger that certain players showed, say Osman Sow, to get 2 goals coming back into the team, and that stakes his claim for a place going forward. For me, makes it, although we'll definitely go on to it, I felt there was a slight capitulation from Cowdenbeath, especially when you get into the high numbers. The fact that the Hearts players were still driving on and still striving to increase the scoreline makes it definitely in the top 5 for me.
Okay, I'm just going to interject with a side note here, a completely unrelated topic and a bit of a downer, to be honest, on the conversation that we're talking about here. There are some rumours going around Twitter at the moment that Hearts and Scotland legend Dave Mackay has possibly passed away tonight, so we will keep you updated on that very, very sad news if true, and the thoughts of everyone involved in Monday Night Football go out to his friends and family and former teammates. We will keep you updated, because at the moment it is just rumours, but for now we'll go back to talking about trivial matters on the park. Sean touched on the desire within the Hearts team to continue and go and score goals. let's talk about the goals, and we'll go through. Obviously, Zeefuik is intrinsically linked to the first three, albeit two of them were only really putting the cherry on the icing on the cake, tucking away the penalties. Firstly, both penalties for you, Scott, the first half too?
Yeah, the first half too, definitely are. I think the positioning of the defender's arm for that first one, it's way out there. I mean, I know that some people always dispute these sort of penalties, but I think in terms of the rules of the game, I think that definitely is a penalty. The second one's pretty much a stone waller. I think there's actually even a handball before there's the pulling down of Nicholson. So, I mean, take your pick which one you want to pull him up for.
Are you sure it's Nicholson? Because every single report I've read says Billy King, even though it's clearly Sam Nicholson falling down.
That's why I stopped reading the newspapers.
Apart from Sky Sports News, which was Bill King.
Yeah,
Bill King.
Bill King. But Sky Sports News even managed to show that with the number 11 going through, and then say 2 minutes later, and Sam Nicholson stuck away the fourth with 11 on his back. All right, him and Billy King swapped shirts after 5 minutes, did they? Anyway, back to the point. So you're right, the second penalty is a weird scenario. I'm still not quite sure how it comes about, because the guy kind of tries to wipe Nicholson out and misses completely, and then decides, I've not really got, and then there's he throws a hand towards the ball and then he pulls him down, but the pull, it's so quick that you're not necessarily sure if it was significant enough to pull Nicholson down. But Nicholson's kind of avoided contact twice already, so he's entitled at that stage to think, well, I'm going to go down here. Did you get the sense that Madden was playing play on, Sean?
Kind of. The whole thing is, as you say, there was pretty much 3 instances he could have given the penalty for. Now, I think when he blew the whistle, it was probably for the wrong one. He had probably let it go on too far at that point. But you can't dispute when you actually look back at it that it was definitely a penalty. So regardless of which one it's given for, or if he does try and play on for that period of time to see what happens, it's a penalty nonetheless. It was just, it's bizarre though if you go and watch it back. I've no gave it away yet. Okay, maybe I can do this. Just
I've got away with the first two, so I'll maybe have a wee talk. Okay, on that last point,
he's going to stab him the next chance he got.
Right. Okay. Let's just to remove ourselves a wee bit for the goals before we throw ourselves properly into those. The game started quite strangely. Hearts really went for it first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and Nielsen actually touched on it in his interview afterwards, that after about 15 minutes it wasn't necessarily going the way we wanted it to. The momentum wasn't quite there as it had been in the first 6 or 7, and Hearts seemed to, specifically, much to the chagrin of a lot of supporters in the stadium, it has to be said, seemed to purposely decide, all right, we're going to play a wee bit of possession stuff for 10 minutes to draw them out. We were passing it a lot more across the back four. Pallardo and Gomez became sideways and back players rather than incisive players a wee bit more. But then that meant when we did go again, as we did in the 26th minute, we just massacred them over 5 minutes. Is that giving Hearts too much credit to say that was all done purposely, Scott?
No. I think Hearts, not just on Saturday, but there has been stages through the season where I think Nielsen has definitely drummed it into the players that they can allow to take their time. I think, again, last week at Queen of the South was a prime example. I wasn't on the show to obviously discuss how I saw the second half, but I was one of these people that was probably screaming for Osman Sow to be getting brought on a good 10 minutes before he was. Now that's why I'm in the stands, and that's why Robin Nielsen is obviously making the key decisions. I think he has a lot of faith in his players. I think the players trust each other, and I think they're quite happy to play 10-15 minutes of possession football, especially against a part-time side, knowing that if need be they'll score 2 or 3 in the last 20 minutes of the game,
especially when a team has 5 at the back. Sean, do you agree with that? And we simply just had to draw them out. It was getting compact around the box, and as we're going to touch on with the future goals, because I think it actually very much came back to haunt them, but it did work for the first wee period. They very much parked on the 18-yard line and just stopped us from there. And if you play into that, if you can't stretch the game or draw them out, that's going to be a long 90 minutes to try and break through.
Yeah, it is. And I think also by doing that and going to the more possession and not necessarily knocking on the door constantly, try and like Billy King when he had the shot, not getting a shot in for another 10 minutes, say, it also, they get that slight complacency in their head, thinking, right, well, we've got them figured out. They didn't ken how to, and it brings them out their shell a bit more. They're trying to get forward more often, and that's when we turn it up a notch again, and we catch them on the break, and that's when things started to happen. So I think it was, I don't know how much of it came from Robbie Neilson and how much it was the players realising, right, well, maybe if we do slow it down, they will try and get into this more instead of just sitting back constantly. But no matter who it came from, it had the right effect, and it's exactly what the game needed.
Okay, let's do it then. Goals, and loads of them. Right, the 2 penalties we've touched on already. Credit goes to Zay Fowke for tucking 2 penalties away against the same goalkeeper. As we know, Hearts have had problems for a number of years with scoring 1 penalty, never mind 2 into the same goalie.
And also missing a penalty in his first game already, which was for a hat-trick. So not only was there pressure on the first one, but there was even more pressure on the third. So no, thumbs up for him, huge thumbs up.
Okay, his big huge thumbs. Okay, looking at the goals, the other goals, the open play goals, a lot of them came from what you would classify as at least semi-long range. Now, what I noticed, especially in the for the second goal, so Zay Fowke's second goal, Hearts' second goal, I noticed that Cowdenbeath are actually further up the park. They're quite advanced at that stage. And Jamie Walker manages to gather possession and drive 10 yards and drive them back. And what you see, as I was mentioning before, is that they tend to gravitate not towards the ball but towards the 18-yard line. They're all trying. I think Nat Weatherburn is miles out of position.
I think they were told to probably mark zonally rather than take man for man. And
possibly,
I think
yeah. And
maybe what's led to so many of the goals.
Nat Weatherburn has got himself significantly out of position, about 10 yards further up the park than he should be.
I think Weatherburn being on the football park was being out of position.
Possibly,
to be fair to him.
But so he drives back, and again, rather than involve himself with pressing the ball or go and confront Zay Fowke in any way, he goes right back to the 18-yard line. Now, that is helped by the fact that Billy King runs beyond, and he essentially takes 2 men with him. The ball's then laid into Zay Fowke, who spins, and it's then the midfielder who's been in a more advanced position who has to come round and confront Zay Fowke, but he's trying to get goal side, at which point, when Zay Fowke spins, the midfielder, quite rightly, is all over the shop because he's so concerned with trying to get back goal side that Zay Fowke then scores from long range. It's something that we then see play out through the entire game, Scott. Why do you think Hearts were so clinical from long range here?
It's not a surprise. I mean, you could actually have a goalie of the season competition with just Hearts involved. I don't think I've ever come across a season like this where, I mean, week by week you go, oh, there's another one, but then you go, aye, but it's not as good as the other 4 or 5 that we've already seen. I mean, nothing's going to be Osturk's goal at Easter Road. I think we can all agree on that. But I mean, Nicholson's now had a couple of thunderbolts. Walker's had 2 or 3. Osturk's obviously had a couple of decent strikes. It's just the way, and Zay Fowke now as well. I mean, he scored had a good strike at Livingston the other week there as well. So I mean, it's not that. I mean, anyone who'd scouted us at any point of the season, they could tell that we're not shy in having a dig from that sort of range and getting it on target more often than not. So I'm not quite sure exactly what Cowdenbeath's game plan was, apart from obviously, like I say, it seemed to be 5 men at the back. It seemed to be pretty zonal. It didn't seem to be picking up players, and ultimately, it was all a bit of a farce in the end, as far as they're concerned.
Sean, as we say, Hearts have shown an ability to score from long range. Was it conceding, territory up to the 18-yard box that was Cowdenbeath's problem? Was it lack of pressure on the ball, having conceded that territory, or was it a combination of everything rolled into one? Yeah,
I'd kind of say all of the above. There wasn't enough pressure. The first one, I wouldn't say it's necessarily falls under that. We've seen it previously. Zay Fowke seems to be really good at getting the ball into feet, going to turn away from goal and dropping the shoulder and coming back and getting that shot away. How long you'll be able to do that without people cottoning on to it, we'll see.
I've got a real worry that if he sticks about with us, he'll not get that split second to do that in another league, in a more advanced league.
But I do feel that he's got enough to other facets to his game that wouldn't necessarily hinder him, especially if we've got other players chipping in with the goals, that he can then lay them in from there. So that's not too much of a worry with me. I didn't see, on that point, Scott, I agree, I didn't see Zayfowk in the future putting up as many goals as he's putting up just now. I didn't think anyone saw him putting up the goals he's putting up just now when he came in. So that's a plus point, but if he has to adapt his game in the future, then so be it. But with that one, he turns his shoulder brilliantly and manages to get the shot away. I'm sure we'll go in the analysis of the actual goal by goal later on, because I think that goal could have possibly been stopped. But
let's do it now then.
Okay.
How could that goal have been stopped in your opinion?
If you have a look at it, the Hearts highlights are especially good for it. Their keeper Thompson takes a big step to his left hand side, is showing far too much of the right hand side, especially the post. Now, don't get me wrong, it goes in the inside netting, and usually the rule of thumb is if it goes in the inside netting, you can't be too harsh on yourself because it's clearly been a good strike. However, from that range, and it's not the fastest shot ever, you should be at least getting across and getting something on that. It's the positioning. You clearly see a shuffle. Also, the weight is on his left foot, so for him to spring back across is made that much harder. It's just wee bits of positioning. Usually I would go from, this goes back to all goalkeeping I look at, if you can do from the centre point of the goal line, the very centre, say you put a peg in and put a bit of thread, between that and the ball you should be at the centre point. The outside of his right bum cheek, put it that way, buttock, is probably where that line should be instead of the centre of his body, thus showing a full ball width to the corner extra for Zayfowk to shoot at.
We should establish at this point, I feel the need to point out that Sean was a goalkeeper at a pretty high standard when he was a child. This isn't Gary Neville hammering Simon Mignolet for no saving the wonder goal of the season from Phil Jagielka. I've asked Sean specifically, as we want to look at this fairly and even-handed, and we want to deal with how good Hearts were but equally how bad Cowdenbeath were, and try and come to some sort of consensus as to why it led to this freak result in general terms.
And just to add in, I was actually a horrendous centre half when I was younger, so I can definitely empathise with the Cowdenbeath guys, especially Weatherburn.
Well, I was a good one, so I'll talk about Oztec school. Okay, right, so we've touched on the goalkeeping error there slightly. Yes. While we're on defensive blunders, I think that leads on perfectly to the fourth goal. Mm-hmm. I have to say, I have never seen less pressure on a strike from 20 yards out than for the Nicholson goal. He's literally got 4 yards clear space, and it's only as he strikes the ball in the half volley that the defender even thinks, I should probably at least move towards him to try and put him off. Didn't get me wrong, it's a great strike, and I think that's one thing that we'll come back to here, is ultimately the defending is horrendous, but you have to punish it where you're finishing, and that's one thing where it'll sound at points like we're trying to take away, and I think some opposition fans have tried to take away from it by saying, well, but Cowdenbeath were horrendous. But I have to say, I've seen a million teams park the bus and sit on the 18-yard line and say, go on then, shoot for long range, and teams can't take advantage. I was at Liverpool-Chelsea at the tail end of last season, and Chelsea essentially sat in their 18-yard box the entire game. Steven Gerrard blazed about 12 shots into the crowd. If you've not got the mentality and the calmness under pressure to just find the top corner, it doesn't matter how many shots for long range you got. Hearts really had that calmness. Nicholson had it in spades. The shot was glorious, but would he have scored that if there was a man pressing the ball, Scott?
Probably not. Again, no, you can only play against who you're playing against.
And that's what we'll keep coming back.
Unfortunately, we were playing against a side who only recently have been hammered, 6-0 at Falkirk, 5-0 at Hibs, so you knew that if you got those early couple of goals, I'm not saying I knew we were going to get 10 goals, but I think at the start of the season we'd all agreed that someone was due a cuffing, and unfortunately for Cowdenbeath it was them. And 80-90% of defensive play, good defensive play, is all based on concentration and just doing your role the correct manner. And Cowdenbeath didn't have one defender at the weekend that was willing to do that. And it's no surprise that we put 10 past them, really.
One thing I would say on that, as we've been talking about the positive aspects of Janero's AFIC as well, if you watch that goal back, there is no pressure on the ball. The defenders are 4 or 5 yards away from Sam Nicholson, but it's telling that Janero's AFIC is tucked just inside the penalty area, and there are clearly 2 defenders really, really scared of him who are standing 2 yards away from him, and in the end give Nicholson acres of room, because they're so feared about Nicholson slipping it to Zayfouk and him hurting them, which is what him being on a hat-trick after half an hour does to the mentality of a defence, Sean.
Having a look at the Nicholson goal as well, I'll give my tuppence on the goalkeeping side of that. Now, if you have a look at this in direct contrast to the Zayfouk goal, he's actually too far towards the post where it goes in. Now, which makes you think, like, well, maybe you should get something on it. But when it's a wonder strike like it is, you can't be too harsh on that. I mean, he has. So this is one where he's got it right.
I've
for
just
that
got this image of Sean in his costume behind the goals, just shouting at this boy, "Do you know what you're doing, pal?"
So to clarify,
down the other end.
To clarify, his position is wrong. But his position, in actual fact, would help him save this had it not been such a wonder strike, which kind of absolves him of blame generally.
Yeah, he's slightly further to the post where it goes in
than you would want him to be,
than he necessarily needs to be. But his weight's on the right side. He puts in a good effort to get to it as well. It's just the pace on the strike it's one of those ones. Genuinely, I walked about 10 yards going because for me that was the best goal of that game. It was just absolutely ripped the skin off the ball. And one of those, had Ali Mostak not hit the wonder goal that he hit this season, that would definitely be one of the contenders for goal of the season. So you can't blame him for that. But that's another one. If you will go back and look at the positioning, he is slightly more towards that side.
No, fair points, that's fine. Scott, Jamie Walker continues to go from strength to strength this season, doesn't he? Is he a player of the year contender for you?
Yeah, and I have to be quite ashamed in saying that when I wasn't asked, but I decided to take it upon myself to put together a squad of Hearts, Hibs and Rangers players at the start of the season. Now, I've been quite critical about Jamie, not in an ability sense, always knew he had ability, but more in terms of his conditioning and, looking after himself fitness wise. And I actually left him out the squad for Fraser Aird and Alex Harris. Yep, I will admit to that.
Alex Harris, the Dundee player.
Yeah, that's right. So, to be fair, I will hold my hands up and say that, since sort of October time, he's been brilliant for us. And he probably has been our best player along with Payardo. It's a game we've spoke about before in previous weeks. I think it'll be hard to actually say who Hearts' best player of the season's been, because it's all went through sort of seasons within the seasons. Sort of summertime, it was Nicholson. Sort of afterwards, you're looking at sort of King. Then after that, Walker and Payardo. Obviously, Gomez had a good start as well at the start of the season. So yeah, he's been immense since sort of October time.
We've mentioned that a couple of times with Walker, but it weirdly has been since that Real Betis article came out saying, the Spanish one where it said he's their main player, everything goes through him, and we're all sitting chuckling. And now that article's no wrong. That article was incredibly prophetic, that now he is our number 10, he is our driving force. As much as possible we try and get the ball to him and things happen around him. Concentrating on the goal for the moment, Scott, how impressed were you by his role in the goal and his ability to finish?
It was a sign of a confident player. I mean, Jamie Walker last season probably would have tried turning again or taking around a couple of guys, but he's got that much confidence now. He just needs to turn once and doesn't even seem to look up. He just knows where that corner is. So yeah, he's came on leaps and bounds. And as I said, I think the 2-0 game against Rangers was probably his turning point this season, where he had when Hearts didn't play that great, but he seemed to have a really good second half and seemed to spur us on. He seems to have just got better and better since that game.
I'm pretty sure we had some kind of ball magnet on the inside of that left hand post, because how many times did we hit that left hand post in the game? It did get You felt a bit sorry for the right hand one. Give that a wee bit laugh.
We never on the subject of woodwork, we never touched on the Billy King shot. That was a weird moment. Still at 0-0, he just smashes it with like no real. That shouldn't go anywhere near the goal
whatsoever on his bad foot, and he seems to somehow absolutely raker the ball. He done it just before we won the first penalty as well. He takes another shot on his left foot and manages to catch it so sweetly. Mm-hmm. He's clearly been working on it, or if not, then he's close to being ambidextrous to be able to hit the ball like that, because he was channeling Rudy Scatchell right there. So
right, let's move on to the one potentially controversial moment of the game then. I think we can all say the game was over by this point, but I have to say Dean Brett, who has a lot to say for himself on the park, he was the one, but I'm amazed he never got a booking for remonstrating with the referee. Every time Hearts got any sort of decision, he took to Twitter straight after the game to say that, I'm not blaming the ref, but he was the reason this happened to us. But also to say that he was adjudged to have fouled Gomez for the penalty, and he can't speak to the first two, but this penalty was the worst decision he had ever encountered. Now, the fact that Dean is a die-hard Hibby maybe influenced that statement somewhat, but Sean, was it a truly poor decision?
As much as I look for it, there's not a defining angle that says it's 100% a dive that people have been trying to say it is. I think it's a soft penalty. I don't necessarily say, and this is completely rose-tinted glasses off, there's not enough evidence there to say it's a dive. I really don't think there is. Now, if that's a Premier League game, an English Premier League game, there's probably 14, 15 cameras on that can see. They can zoom in on it and say there's no contact whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The level of football we're at just now, it is a case of it's down to the referee. We can try and get as much as possible, but especially when it's on Hearts World, and I mean I've seen the setup they've got for Hearts World. It's good for what we're putting out, but it's not exactly. You're not going to beam it all around the world and be in front of 200 million viewers at a time. So for me, it's down to that decision, and the refs gave it.
Scott, you're nodding in agreement.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with Sean there, although I would like to add that if it was given against Hearts, you'd obviously be screaming probably as much as Dean Brett was. So I can see both sides of the story. From my sort of viewpoint within the ground, it is hard to sort of see those incidents properly. So I wouldn't like to say otherwise. I've watched it a few times on the Hearts TV and that, but again, as Sean's saying, you don't get a great view. And I mean, if he has dived, and that's a big if, then you've got to think, 5-0 up in a game like that, is there really any need to? I'd like to think that he wasn't really that type of player, so I think I'd rather just say that there was definitely some sort of form of contact there,
especially against his old club.
I suppose sentiment could in theory come.
I mean, he never left him under bad terms or anything like that, so you would think that against anyone you wouldn't want to do that against, but who knows? Okay,
and we'll start to batter through we'll spend the next 5 minutes on this, because at this point we were wishing this game would go forever, and Cowdenbeath were wishing it was already over. So we'll take a bit from both schools and go through it relatively briskly. The penalty itself, it's
cheeky.
Yeah, Scott, are you from the school of different class, cool and composed, all that kind of stuff, or are you thinking that's rubbing it in a wee bit much?
Not a different class. No, let's be honest, right? The other part-time club. Okay, so from that point of view, it did reek a wee bit of, what's next? Are we going to bring the goalkeeper out for the next penalty? We'll let this. Sometimes you do
for Alexander to take it.
From the other side, you do sometimes look at those incidents. I've saw it on Sunday league games, and I've been running sides that have been at either side of that, where you're 9-0 up and you send the goalkeeper up for the penalty, and then you watch the other team do the thing, and you go, well, no, that's not very nice. But at the end of the day, Cowdenbeath are out there. They know what it's all about, and I'm sure they'll not be seeing it that way. Some fans might jump on that sort of side of the game, but I thought it was just a great penalty. Really good to see.
I mean, they're getting paid to be there. They have to take the good with the bad. And also, just relating it to everyday life, there's nothing better than putting 10 goals past your mate on FIFA. You could go 3-4-0 up and you see them getting wound up and you can just ease off, but you didn't. You go for the jugular and you want to get 10 goals past them, because I mean, you didn't text them a week later and say, mind that time I beat you 4-0, but you text them saying, mind that time I beat you 10-0.
Well, it's funny because literally while we were at the game, someone said with 5 minutes to go, mind that time we won 10-0, and about 40 folk just fell about laughing because it is the ridiculousness of it. But there is that thing, and let's talk about it now then, this general idea of, and Laurie Dunshire, who I think does a great job on Hearts TV, mentioned that after the 5th, I think, saying you do start to feel sorry for Robbie Thompson and the Cowdenbeath defence now. I have to say, Laurie, no I didn't, because we've been humped loads. And you know what? See, you know when we got beat 7-0 by Celtic in the Scottish Cup last year, I didn't see anyone feeling sorry for me. Everyone was rubbing it in. And you take it on the chin, because you know that one day it'll come round the other way.
I think it's down to the statuses of the club. Obviously, because Hearts were playing Celtic, it was a bigger match. Hearts are a big club. I think it's hard to sometimes feel sorry for Hearts, even in this. Even
but if
in
you
the
look in the situation we were
year.
in,
exactly. But Cowdenbeath, you do look at their situation. Jimmy Nicholl always speaks well about the game. He's done a good job at a few clubs. You wouldn't really want to wish that sort of result on him or the club itself. You've got guys like Dean Brett that have had quite tough personal circumstances. He's just sort of came back from that. So you do look at some of those kind of equations and you sort of go, but at the end of the day, you're too busy enjoying the fact that this time last year we were watching ourselves get beat 7-0 at home to Celtic.
And the big thing there is, in the grand scheme of things, it's just a game of football.
Yeah.
There's another one next week. You'll get over it. You'll probably stay in the league.
Rangers next. We're hoping they'll bounce back very well.
And that's fine. I think sometimes people overdo it, like these guys in a year are going to be waking up with PTSD, thinking, remember that time we conceded 10 at Tynecastle.
I'm sure it probably happened to some of them maybe when they were playing youth football and that. Maybe not
exactly.
10-0, but I mean, we've all been there.
They will move on.
I've been on the end of 16-0s playing in goals and just been like, what can you do? But there's nothing more motivational. Once again, going back to that, had they been beat 3-0 by Hearts, you go, well, I mean, they're top of the league, they've been trouncing everyone. It's to be expected. 10-0, it's right, get our fingers out, how do we make sure this never happens again?
Yeah, and they might actually learn more from it.
Definitely. It can be a driving force as well, that certain players who go, that was too severe, I never want that to happen again. It might be the driving force that changes their career completely, and they might end up at sorry for any Cowdenbeath fans here, but a much better team in the future.
But the interesting thing as well, and I think this is where it goes on to the big thing of ruthlessness in general and going for that result. Some people look at it and say it's no very sporting, but the fact is that could have simply been another 5-0, and that sounds like you're taking it for granted. I'm not at all. But in the early season, we can all accept that Hearts bulldozed a decent number of teams, and it became second nature for a period to score 4 and 5 in a game. This one sticks out. This is a game that we'll talk about in 20 years' time, saying, mind that time we won 10-0. Now that is the joy of football. Every football game you go to, it's got the ability to have something unique about it that you've never encountered before, that you'll remember and you'll tell your grandkids about. That is why we all go to the football, so that it creates moments like that we can always look back on. Now this could have just been a meaningless not meaningless, but an relatively insignificant 3 points on the way to, we hope, clinching the title. Instead, it's this moment that we'll all look back on at the end of the season and say, what a great day that was. And ultimately, surely that's what being a football fan's all about.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure that, all right, for the next week or so, but you know what it's like in football. In fact, well, you've already seen stories come out today. Football just moves on at such a pace in terms of the media and that, and how fans sort of give out stick and take stick. Nobody's really going to remember that much about it. I mean, it'll get mentioned again at the end of the season when you review shows and we talk about it, but really, a lot grand scheme of things, it's not going to be remembered that much.
Okay, final 4 goals then. We've very little to say about the Wilson goal, I assume, because it's the world's scrappiest goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 2 So goals we'll touch on now because, let's go to Ozturk. Ozturk scores another screamer. Again, a lack of pressure on the ball, but that's to be expected, and that's the joy of having a centre half who will stride out, because they're less likely to press the ball in that scenario. How good is it simply to see that he's no lost it?
It's a great strike. I mean, I know Sean will probably touch on the goalkeeper, but I think when you're watching the ball travelling from that distance and at that height, I think you should probably be able to parry that one out. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a great strike to hit it that accurately at that pace from that distance, but I think again, the goalkeeper, you're probably looking at that and going, I don't know, you maybe should be getting to that.
Sean?
I'm not necessarily as harsh as Scott is on that. Now, didn't get me wrong, he gets a touch on the ball, which you showed me in slow motion. A very slight touch on the ball, which you would fancy you get a stronger hand on that and get more to it. But looking at it, once again, the Hearts TV from behind the goals and stuff, his positioning's fairly decent for it. It does come through a rookie bodies and stuff as well. I'm not putting as much of that on, especially when it hits just almost the inside of the post. That's a lot harder to keep out than the Zeefouk one. So
there was a song on Kickback earlier that I thought encapsulated it perfectly when it said, when the ball hits the net like a low-flying jet, that's an Oztag. It was kind of perfectly described, that goal. It just seemed to skid along, and you eventually thought this is going to bounce at some point, and it just didn't. It just kept going 3 feet off the ground.
It's another one that was going for the home and missile on the left-hand post.
Fair play to him. He scored at an angle which you could normally only score in the original FIFA Mega Drive game, which is that really tight, acute sort of angle to the right. So I mean, it's a great strike, great technique. I mean, there's some of the world's better players you don't see try to strike the ball from that kind of angle. So it is a good hit.
Okay,
Scott, I think I need to give you a couple of lessons on FIFA 15, pal, because Sam saw me score a couple.
Is
of
it the same for you? I didn't play the more modern versions. I'm still stuck on the Mega Drive.
Okay, Osman Sow. It was great from a Hearts perspective to see him back, to see him getting in amongst the goals, but they were the 9th and 10th goals. How much of them were down to positive play for Sofiane El Hasnaoui and Osman Sow for the 9th goal, and Osman Sow on his own really for the 10th goal, and how much of it was purely down to complete tiredness, disillusion, wanting the ground to open up and swallow them from the Cowdenbeath?
I think the 9th goal was decent movement from So. It was a sort of clever through ball from El Hasnaoui as well. And it was a decent finish. The 10th goal, I play sevens on a Tuesday night, and the 10th goal just reeked to, alright, it's nearly 7 o'clock, my wife's got the cooking on the go, and let's just wrap this game up. And everyone just stops at that minute when somebody mentions that, because So just wanted to just hit the ball. Like normally, I think we said this before the show started, in that normal situation, So would probably take that for a little wander, try and take it around a couple of players. He just whacked it with his left foot. Keeper looked exhausted, didn't he look that interested, and it's just rolled into the net.
Like someone shouted Nick's goal, the winner, and everyone's thinking oh,
definitely.
We've played 20 minutes extra time, and just anyone shoot will help it in.
The 9th goal, keeper stands big, that doesn't go in.
Okay.
He goes down, I'm going to say it again, he goes down to his bum and leaves a gap for him to squeeze it through, which necessarily, that sounded wrong. That shouldn't be going.
I think we've seen Craig Gordon make a few saves of that nature recently, where you're right, he just stood up and hits him.
If you stand big and they put it through your legs, fair enough, because you've made yourself as big a target as possible. That's the one weakness. If you can't close your legs quick enough, then credit to them for trying it. But that goes between his leg and his arm, manages to squeeze through really easily. The 10th goal, he could have probably done a forward roll across and saved it. The ball's travelling at no speed. It's just laziness. But at that point, as you say, they've just capitulated, and you can tell that they just want the final whistle to go. But it still doesn't excuse the laziness for no diving for that one. Okay,
Scott is about to leave us because he has a bus to catch. Scott, do you want to leave us with your final thought from Hearts Cowdenbeath and where it leaves you with the season in general?
Well, I have to admit, a positive side of it was I was actually heading into work today and I actually saw a guy with a Cowdenbeath polo shirt on. So fair play to that guy, whoever he was that was on the bus with me today.
And we have to say fair play to the 50 or so fans who stayed throughout, because not many fans would have braved that.
Definitely.
Okay, perfect, Scott. Thank you very much for your time, mate.
If I didn't get home, tell my wife I love her.
Well, we will do, but it would probably be a bit weird. But we'll do it nonetheless for you, seeing as you braved the cold to get here. Be careful on the slippy roads.
I will. Good boys.
See you later. Well, that's the first on-air goodbye that we've had. What we're going to do, we're just going to very quickly wrap up on this game, then we'll go to a couple of ads. We just want to come back with one further talking point before we leave you. It will be very short because it's only myself and Sean in the studio. Sean, what are your thoughts as you come away from that 10-0? Is it purely just the positive? Will you just be left with that warm fuzzy feeling of, as we say, remember the time we scored 10? Is there anything that's come from that game that gives you real positive impetus for the season ahead? Did you learn anything really from that game?
I learned what I've known for the last couple of weeks or couple of months this season. We can shoot from distance, which is something that's been lacking for years and years and years.
Can you learn something that you've known for the last 2 months?
Well, it's been reassured.
Okay. Emphasised.
I think it's also just the fact that this Hearts team, I think it's really helped by how young a lot of the team is. But as I said, the striving to put more goals up on the board and just really hammer home that we are the best team in this league.
Right, let's go on from there, because we may as well just do the last point now and then we'll wrap up in a couple of minutes on time for the first time in the history of Monday Night Football.
I still didn't believe you.
The last couple of things I wanted to talk about, there was a real clear evidence of two separate types of wins this weekend. There was Hibs grinding out the result, which actually over the last couple of months we've become more famed for. And there was Hearts really trouncing a team, which again maybe over the last couple of months has been more relatable to Hibs, although they've not generally done it. They've not done it a huge amount of times, but they did hammer Rangers at Easter Road. They have, as Scott touched on, put quite a few goals past Cowdenbeath at Easter Road, things like that. So both teams have, but Hearts had done that in the start of the season.
Yep.
And Hibs had struggled with a consistency to the results, but they're now showing they've discovered that. They've discovered a way to grind it out. What have the teams learnt for you, both sides? What have we learnt from this experience in the First Division this season, that if and hopefully when both clubs go to the SPL next season, we can utilise to make us a more significant challenger, a better SPL team than we have been previously? Are there things that we've learned from this experience that we couldn't have possibly learned had we just spent another 2 or 3 straightforward years in the SPL that we can now utilise to make us more significant challengers?
I think the main one from a Hearts standpoint, there's loads of facets to go with it, but is the habit of winning. There's no better lesson to learn than the habit of winning. If you're used to winning and you're winning regularly, then it's easy for that to continue. If you're like the Hearts team last season, if you keep on getting beat by teams that haven't beat you before, that does nothing for your confidence. It sucks for everyone involved. It really does. And then goes the confidence, then goes the long range shooting, then there goes the grinding out results when you maybe shouldn't come away with the 3 points. So just getting all those wins under your belt, getting the momentum and getting the fans back on side, everything's helped with what's happened off field at Tynecastle as well. Now don't get me wrong, there was loads of question marks at the start of the season, but I feel like all of them have been disproved now. So that's the main thing from a Hearts standpoint. Hibs they found how they play. They found, especially under their new manager, it took longer than it did for Hearts to find that. Now I think that it helped Hearts that they had familiar faces coming in. and people who had already been there. But Hibs have found not only two formations that they are comfortable with playing with, they found the personnel and young players to take them forward over the next wee while, and it seems like they found the right man to be in charge. So
I agree with that. I have to say, I think a huge thing that we've learned as well is the ability to play with a target on your back. You know, a lot of the time, even in the SPL, at various points, Hearts and Hibs have been scalps because they've identified themselves as the third or fourth best teams in the league, and they've been challenging up the top end. So when you go to a St Mirren or a Ross County and that, it's a big game, even though sometimes we're thinking, well, we're not that great. I didn't really understand why they're so excited about the idea of beating us. They still are, because they see us as almost being the level that they could aspire to, being third in the league. I think this season we've shown a real ability to just deal with that, just shrug that off. And I mean, this season more than ever, we are the cup finals in the league. Hearts, because Hearts identified themselves so quickly as the runaway leaders, because Hibs just now are the form team and are on this long unbeaten run, we've both encountered this period where, and we saw it when Falkirk came to Tynecastle and ended it, it was like they had won something that day, because they had won the accolade of being the team that stopped Hearts, this unstoppable force. Well, we did it. And that was, it's almost like, you know, if they do fail, if they get maybe fourth place and then fail in the playoffs, they will look back at the season and one of their achievements will be, well, we went to Tynecastle and won. And that's been throughout. Hibs are now encountering that as well, where teams are coming in and it's by any means necessary. You know, Alloa are quite happy to just sit and grind it out if it means that they can get something against a Hibs team that they've probably got very little chance of getting. I think personally that's a huge thing, because the big problem with the SPFL, you know, the top league in this country, is that everyone trips each other up out with the Old Firm. Absolutely everyone. So Aberdeen have been different class, but then they start to drop points. Dundee United had been really good up until the last 3 or 4 weeks, and they've just fallen apart because they're now losing to St Johnstone, Partick Thistle, and it's always been the case. There's been a couple of points where teams have managed to buck the trend. Hearts in '98, I think, is the obvious example, because in actual fact they had a better record against everyone else than Rangers and Celtic did, but they had a terrible record against Rangers and Celtic. But in general terms, that's always the problem. That's why no team outside the Old Firm can challenge, is because they all beat each other, because on a day-to-day basis they can be a bit much of a muchness. I think that's a huge thing that they've learnt. Is there anything else, Sean? That those are more mental things. Is there anything on the park? Is there anything, have we seen players emerge that you think, had we played in the SPL, might not have necessarily actually got the chance?
Well, going back to my earlier point of shooting from a distance, not only scoring from a distance, but just shooting from a distance for Hearts. I've been tearing my hair out for the past 5 years that genuinely it is a rarity for someone to take a shot from outside the 18-yard box, let alone score from outside the 18-yard box. So to get them so readily and so, like, it's a constant stream, at least 3 shots will be taken from the outside of the box, which just shows confidence and people believing in their ability.
Well, I think that's a great point as well in terms of strikers. I think both clubs, Hibs have, as we've said numerous times on this show, Hibs have had a much better record for bringing through goal scorers than Hearts have. Hearts have really lacked a potent goal threat for quite a long time, or they've had one but they've either, someone's gone wrong, they've got injured, or they've not managed to get them the service, and we've struggled as a result. This season I think we've seen both teams have actually now managed to assemble strong strike forces who are, a lot of them are actually new to Scottish football, but they're being given this season to acclimatise. And this, like we're saying with Zayfout comes in and has never really been a goal scorer elsewhere. He's been a target man and a bit more of a creator. He's coming in, he's rattling in the goals now. If he stays for next season, I don't think the SPFL is going to intimidate him. I think he'll go in thinking, I know I can score goals in Scotland. It doesn't matter that it was the lower league to him, I don't think. And I think we're seeing that now with Jason Cummings, for example, as well. He's going to go back into the SPFL thinking, I can be top goal scorer here as well.
Yeah, I think it depends on between now and the end of the season how much playing time he gets at Hibs. But it's definitely been a positive experience for him dropping down the league this year, especially when last season ended on such a sour note for him. It went from such extreme highs to extreme lows for him. So Going on that point as well, I think it's massively helped Scott Allan. Had he went straight into the SPFL, you don't know how much of an effect he would have necessarily got to have. Whereas coming up against some of those lower calibre teams, you see a lot more of the ball, and you get a lot more of a feel of how the game is going.
Equally, I think you could argue that for a creative midfielder like that, though, it might actually be harder, because in theory you face a lot more teams who park the bus, and the fact that we've shown that these kind of creative players can work even against teams who are putting 8, 9, 10 men behind the ball, that has to then bode well if both teams go back up to the SPFL and you've got teams who are trying to go toe to toe with you. There's going to be a lot more space for these creative players to exploit in those types of games.
Very possibly, and it might lead to him getting more attention on the park as well, because there's less threats from the other team, so they can just purely look to nullify what they see as the big threats for, say, Hibs or Hearts. The same goes with Jamie Walker, however, for Scott Allan. I think if Hearts were in the SPFL this season, I don't necessarily see him having the same season that he's had this year, because you can only speculate on it, but I would fancy the rotation would be more. He wouldn't necessarily get the same run in the team that he's got. Also, with the other players that have came in, you're maybe looking for that bit more experience than gambling with the youth. Okay. All in all, though, it's been, especially at this point in time, it's looking like a very positive experience for both teams, and can only stand at both teams in good stead moving forward. Which is a great thing, given how negative I think relegation is. You know, the connotations there are purely what a horrendous experience. And at this moment in time, both teams could in theory come out of this smelling like roses, thinking, well, actually that was kind of the best thing that could have happened to us. We've managed to go back to the drawing board, find a young ambitious manager who has a plan, has managed to build a squad of players far superior to what either team should have in the Championship. I mean, we have got a squad of players that both teams probably would have loved at any point over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say at least. That is pretty incredible when you actually look at it. Sean, my final question for you. Robbie Nielsen mentioned this week that we hope when Hearts go into the SPFL next season, he said that his aim as Hearts manager will be a top 6 position. At this moment in time, assuming that they embrace what they've learnt this year and carry it on, but not assuming too much movement in terms of squads, we're kind of, for the purposes of this hypothetical exercise, assuming they're going up with the same squad, where would you plot both teams at the SPL in this moment in time? That's a good one. I definitely see Hearts would need to, realistically, coming off the momentum and stuff gained this season, and depending how much, as you say, how much we keep the team together and who we necessarily add to it, need to be pushing to look to get to the top 4. Top 6, happy with that. Top 4 should be the aim, however. So plot yourself against Aberdeen and Dundee United as the rivals. I think people genuinely, we need to, at the start of next season, need to lay down a marker and show we never just ran away with it in the Championship because it was a Championship and we're the SPFL team coming down. We ran away with the Championship because we should have been in the SPFL last year. Had we not had the financial goings on, we would still have been there. And what about Hibs? Would they be alongside Hearts then, aiming for the top 6, or is there more work to be done at Easter Road? Or? I think, as I say, it would be easier for one of the other guys to say, not necessarily me, but having seen Hibs, they've definitely got the potential to be shooting for that. The consistency is the main thing, because once again we're seeing them, like the weekend there, they're grinding out the results, but it's not been there over the entire season, and there has been the slip-ups against teams that they should be beating, which hasn't been the case with Hearts. So there's definitely the possibility there for them to do it, but it's up to them to show us that they can be that consistent moving forward.
Good place to wrap up. There will be many more chats about how the teams are set up to go into next season over the coming months. Hopefully what we will see play out over the next few months is that both teams will ultimately be preparing for next season in the SPL, but there are a lot of twists and turns in that journey to come. Hopefully no too many, because right now we've got an Edinburgh 1-2, so it would be nice if that continues. What I'm going to do right now is confirm, unfortunately, that the sad news about Dave Mackay is in fact true. So Dave Mackay has passed away tonight. So as we said previously, our thoughts go out to the former teammates, his family and friends of Scotland and Hearts and Spurs and Derby legend Dave Mackay, one of the greatest Scottish players ever to have played the game. Very, very sad news tonight. But we know that one of his first loves were Heart of Midlothian, and there is no better way to commemorate him than Hearts going on to win the title this season. So everyone at Monday Night Football hopes that happens, and we hope that there will be Edinburgh derbies in the SPFL next season. Thank you for listening to Monday Night Football on Radio Saltire. Stay tuned for a night of music. We will be back with you next week to talk about Hibs versus Berwick Rangers in the Scottish Cup. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.